Welcome to the 30th episode of the Decentralized Opportunity podcast. I'm your host, Tanner Lytle, here with your other host,
Wyatt Carson. Hi, Tanner.
Hello.
For a 30th episode, we have a very exciting. I just realized how our topic tonight. I don't know if it fits a 30th episode, but it's a really good topic. Today, we would like to talk about unemployment. We come from different backgrounds, you and I, and and we're experiencing it in your in the daytime. You are experiencing it from a different angle. You are seeing people who have been recently laid off, unemployed, that sort of thing. It's everywhere. I myself have been laid off twice. And when you presented the idea originally, it took me 3 seconds to process. I was like, that's brilliant. I think it's a great topic to talk about because it sucks so much, right?
So this week we're going to cover what to do when you get laid off from your job. It's something, like you said there, I'm in my job right now. We're working to connect people to the right opportunities in IT. And most of the time, unfortunately, it's not passive candidates who are happy in their job or maybe like a little stagnant and looking for the grass is greener or the better opportunity for the next level. It's usually people who just got their worlds shaken by a big layoff, downsizing, and outsourcing something, and they're in desperate need of new employment. And this is the seriousness of what I do. And I take it very seriously because it is literally people's lives. And I just always think back to how important it was to me to change jobs and all of the decisions and the stakes and all that. And so when we read in the news about 10,000 layoffs here or a cut of 10% or 13%, these cost cutting measures, or we've talked all the weeks prior about AI systems and how that's going to disrupt stuff and how that's going to change how people employ. At the end of the day, this is still real people with real stories. And I thought it might be a really neat time for you to kind of share yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I dive in mine, I think that was really well said. I think people read the news. A lot of people are scared about the economy right now, and that's fair. I have my own fears. But, Google stock taking a dive or whatever, from my perspective down here on Earth, I don't care about Google as a company. But when that tech bubble kind of popped not too recently, and there were mass layoffs, I don't care that the company's fixing their bottom line. I care that there's now 130,000 tech workers instantly out of a job, or manufacturing, or all of these areas. These are human lives, and you're spot on. I don't have the numbers. I wish I would have looked them up before we started this, but I'm going to take a leap and say that the percentage of Americans who are prepared to survive a layoff for an extended period of time, 6 months, 12 months, is probably extremely small. And I base that off of the knowledge that a lot of people don't have huge savings. And, so with that said, great point. Yes. So the reason I immediately jumped on this bandwagon of talking about this is because I've experienced it twice. And the very first time was a traumatic event for me. And it wasn't that long ago. It was, I ultimately was part of the COVID layoffs, as they were known. I kept my job longer than many people at my company at the time, and I was very fortunate for that. But one day I got a email from, or an email, a meeting invite. I was working from home. It was COVID, deep into COVID. And I got an email invite from a very high ranking person in my company who, like, I have a relationship with, and I've met this person before. So I assumed it was something about a project, but it was a little shady. And as days went on and I was waiting for this meeting, I started to think, oh crap, maybe this isn't going to be a new project. So I started the meeting and I'm talking with the individual, and he's a very nice guy. And then 4 minutes into my meeting, where we're just small talk. Oh, how's the weather? Blah, blah, blah. 4 minutes into my meeting, the vice president of HR suddenly magically joins my meeting. And I'm going to recreate on video right now, and I'll explain it for the podcast, my exact reaction. Here I am talking to this C-suite level individual, talking about the weather in Omaha or whatever. Here comes the VP of HR. My reaction, I sat back in my chair and started clapping and laughing. And to this day, I look back at that reaction as something pretty crazy, but that was my brain processing. Oh crap, here it comes. I'm screwed. Sure enough, I got laid off. And they were very apologetic and, whatever. And they were nice people. But I got off the meeting and I sat in my office at home. My wife was downstairs. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to explain this? So I go downstairs and, I spill the beans. There's no way to approach that conversation. And, my wife is a very loving, caring individual. So, she gave me some comfort because she could still tell the emotions were starting to pick up in me as it was starting to process in my own mind what just happened and what this intends. For a little background information, I got laid off exactly 1 year after starting at this company. This company moved me back to Omaha, relocation, the whole thing. They wanted me so bad to come to this company. Exactly 1 year later, here I am back in Omaha, which I didn't intend to come back to, and laid off. So, oh boy, the scramble and the emotions and what I had to do to change my thinking, which we'll get into in this podcast, was overwhelming. And the best way I can describe it is traumatic. And that's why I felt this topic was so valuable. And I'm really excited you brought this up because so many people are experiencing this. And I know how I felt during it. And I feel just horrible for everyone going through it right now or who may go through it in the future. It's just no one enjoys it.
Yeah. Well, you said traumatic, and the first step really is just processing that trauma. I'm the type of person when I'm faced with whatever situation, I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna take action. I'm gonna scramble. I'm gonna try to solve whatever situation is. But there's nothing to solve at this point. You really just need to take that time and process it. So how did you process your first layoff?
Immediately, this wasn't a conversation I had with my kids. My kids were very young. It wasn't that I was keeping secrets. It was just, they were like 3 and 5. They don't need random stress yet. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a big fan of keeping big things like this, but they just didn't need that in their lives. So I tried to carry on with the positive demeanor and I had connections. I had been networking. I had a stellar LinkedIn page. I had a good resume. I had people from my company offering to, write me letters of recommendation. So I think the first couple of days, I didn't think it would be that big of a deal. Now, I knew I had a burden, kind of a hurdle to cross in finding an equivalent job. But I think it took days to realize that, probably weeks to realize that it was going to be a long road and it wasn't going to be that simple because during COVID layoffs, it's not like just my company was affected and everyone else is still hiring. No one was hiring. Lots of people were laying off. There were no jobs of an equivalent level where I was at available, period. Remote work was brand new. There were several companies still were terrified of working for remote or working from home. And so how did I process? A lot of just discussions with my wife. And she, once again, she was my rock during this. And there's no shame in it. Tears were had and fears were shared. And it was a rough time, but making sure my family was aware of the situation, starting to develop a plan, not really doing anything yet. Exactly as I said, I took that first week and did nothing. I mean, Sure, I worked around the house, I did gardening or whatever I did, but I didn't go online. I did update my resume, but I didn't start job hunting. Processing is huge because your emotions are peak. Whether you're sad and crying, whether you're upset and slamming your fists on your computer desk, or whatever the situation is, your emotions are high, and it's really valuable to just kind of take a deep breath, accept that this is the situation, and then build a plan. If I think you and I, before we were talking about it, is if you get laid off and you jump in that afternoon to start applying for jobs, you don't know the mess that you're putting out there, whether that's your resume, whether that's utilizing your connections and your recommendations a little too soon, um, burning those connection bridges. Just take the time. That's the best thing. A couple days, you don't have to take a week. You don't have to do an extended period. It could be a day, 2 days, but you need to process it and you need to bring yourself back down to a rational level. It's very important.
Well, people can smell desperation.
Yeah, so much. And I was desperate.
You hit in sales, you want to sell something. Every time you want to sell something to somebody, you never sell it.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment that you're busy and you can't think twice, that's the moment you always sell it. And there's just something about being needy that just turns off people. And like
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, if you're just going and throwing your resume out there and applying to everything, you're just frantic. You look like you're a mess. You're not the type of person who's put together, who's going to join a team and bring lift and immediate value, because they can see it on you that you are that wreck, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you haven't put yourself together. So I would say processing is number one, but number two is kind of laying the foundation of where you are and figuring out things like, are you getting a severance package?
Mm-hmm.
Understanding what is in that severance package. How do you say that word?
Severance. Right,
Severance
right.
package. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
So understand what is in your severance package. Don't just sign it right away, but really review it. Take time. HR, they will give you time on those things, because I've always been somewhat naive as a person, and people put here, sign these things. Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you do that. And then you realize later you might have missed out on certain opportunities or certain negotiation parts of it for back commissions or back vacation, all these other things. Those will be waiting for you once you get your head clear. And then once your head's clear too, look at your finances. And a big thing that happens to me, especially, and I'm sure it happens to everyone who's listening to here, you get a little bit of that finance creep when you start making a little bit more money.
Yep.
You have some extra subscriptions, you have maybe an extra car payment or higher car payment, or these going to the coffee shop, going out to eat, doing all these things a little too much. Really take time to review your finances and see how much you actually need to survive, and then evaluate how much you have saved up, so you can build yourself a runway to understanding, like, how long can I be until I need to have that next paycheck coming.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, so many people are paycheck to paycheck.
That's it. I would say step 2 after processing is evaluate your finances. If you have a severance, awesome. I mean, it still sucks, but you're in a better spot than a lot. If you don't have a severance package, you may have to start scrambling sooner. One thing I recommend that I didn't do, and this was purely out of pride, and let me just lay this foundation for the rest of this discussion. Being laid off was the biggest lesson I've ever had in my life about humility. And I don't think people understand that. I was getting promoted. Like I said, they brought me in. I felt needed and wanted. They want my skill set and they think I'm a badass. And my ego about my career was unchecked. And my ego after my layoff continued to be unchecked. So just to lay that foundation, if I could add a step 1.5 is accept it as a humbling experience. You are not God's gift to business. No one is. And everyone in this world is liable to get laid off or fired or anything. So anyways, what I was trying to say is something that I recommend that you do is bite the bullet, take the ego hit, and look into unemployment. I was laid off for I was unemployed for, I think in total, I was unemployed for about a year. And then I found a job in between, and I got laid off a second time. That's a whole other story. Not once. I did look into it. Went on to the state of Nebraska unemployment, and I was like, oh, this is a lot of rules and regulations, and I ignored it. It was so egotistical. It was so arrogant of me. And I say that because I know there's a lot of people out there, especially a lot of dudes, who don't want that assistance. They think I can handle it. If I could go back, I would have looked into it day one, because it wasn't about me. It was about my wife. It was about my children. It was about the house I live in, the groceries we needed to eat. Those are way more important than how badass I think I am. So it's I digress, but you're absolutely right. Finances. Look at your budget. Look at your bills. Do you have every streaming service known to man? Might be time to cut off Paramount Plus, things like that. You have to understand financially where you are, and that will tell you how to move forward in these next steps we're recommending.
Just to keep on your subject of your view of yourself, we put so much of our self-worth into what we do.
Yes.
And even, I don't know if it's an American culture thing. I'm sure it is. It's not what are you interested in. It's where do you work? What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And people judge you based off of that.
100%.
And when your whole identity is around, I work for this company, or I do this thing, and then you're not doing that anymore, it's very disruptive. And it took me, I still have trouble to this day after I left the game store of not associating myself with the game store. I found myself over 6 years, 7 years later, I was telling a story and I was still referring to it as we.
Yep.
And I got called out on that. And they're like, you're not part of it. You sold out of it. I'm like, I did. But I still associate myself with that. I still have that. And I left on good terms and still very close with everybody. But to have that torn away from you through a firing or a layoff or an outsourcing, however you want to phrase it, you really need to have a sense of self that's beyond your job. And I really appreciate you saying with humbling, because then you took it back to, I'm not just a consultant. I'm not just this badass streaming. What was it? Business operations. What was your title there before?
I don't
Continuous improvement manager.
Yeah, I think it was continuous improvement manager was my title. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're not that. You're a father, you're a human, you're a husband, you're these things. And so, yeah, get rid of it, get out of your head, get out of, who you think you are, and focus on who you really are, and build that bedrock, build that foundation.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of that too, when you have your finances, is healthcare. And this is the hardest thing I really have issues with in our current market, is your healthcare is really tied to your employer. And as someone who was self-employed for years by himself and with the worst, crappiest insurance that you can imagine, it's a huge part of us now. And there is Cobra, which I've had to do myself, and I've had to help like my family members with. And oh my gosh, is that expensive. Yeah. And for those who don't know what it is, essentially you can continue whatever benefits you were on with your previous employer, but you have to pay 100% of the cost of those benefits.
Yep.
And those benefits are so expensive. And just to show how expensive it is to be an employer, you should look at the cost of providing not just healthcare, but dental and the whole smorgasbord of benefits that we take for granted as employees. It's super expensive. And then when you get on Cobra and you want to continue your dental plan and realize it's going to cost you $150 a month, or your healthcare plan for your family is $1,400 a month. Those are all things that also bring you into reality. But what is nice now is we do have things like the healthcare marketplace, so healthcare.gov. If you have taken a huge financial hit, you can get lots of tax credits to get things affordable. And there is a little bit of a stigma thing there where you're like, oh, I don't need that. Well, I'm a person who was on that for years. And I'll tell you, it's easy to do. So don't be terrified. Just go on. Don't be too much above it. So get on those things too.
part of the ego hit. While I was a kind of a self-absorbed jerk about unemployment, just to my family's detriment, I regret it to this day, just not pursuing it further. I was fortunate in the timing of my layoff was during the COVID emergency, and essentially it was a free-for-all for Medicaid. And I did. I have young children. I couldn't afford $1,500 a month to pay my own insurance. It was insane. I got the COBRA, letter from my employer a week later. It was like, hey, you can keep your benefits for $1 bajillion that you're no longer making. I have my own thoughts about the medical system, but Medicaid was in a state of emergency, which meant that if you had children and you lost your job, you could still have healthcare. And fortunately, I did that. We ended up having to go to hospitals and doctors' visits. Wasn't disturbed. My children got to maintain their health. So this goes back to being humble, and this might be the main theme of this entire list. Think about other people in your life. If you have family and you qualify, get Medicaid. It's free. And if you're one of those people who are stubborn about receiving benefits from the government, that's fine. Just keep in mind who is suffering is a strong word, but who is not benefiting from that. And if it's your family, you might have to push that ego aside. But you're spot on. I totally forgot about health insurance. That's really important.
Well, so much of your plan moving forward, what you need to do when you're laid off has nothing to do with really getting a job. It's restabilizing yourself. And again, we mentioned it before, you have an issue, you want to fix it, and you rush out there just to go throw your resume, go apply, just hit whatever you can. And no, you need to take a step back, calm down, and do the essential parts. And then we can move on to what I would think is what is best for you in the future. So we focused a lot on entrepreneurship in this podcast, and there's a lot of people who want to take that leap, but through things like layoffs and their whole world's getting shaken, they feel like they can't. They feel like, okay, I'm just going to go apply, I'm going to do this, and then maybe some years down the road, and then just years turn into decades, and decades turn into never wanting to do it. So, you can view it, maybe perhaps it is a blessing to take that leap that you've always been wanting to take, or it's that time to find what you are really good at a job, and assess what opportunities are out there, and build that plan on how you're going to go out and try to get that. So can you kind of walk through, you mentioned a little bit like having a resume, having your networking. What was your steps to get out there?
I appreciate you centering me, because everyone has different experiences who go through this. A layoff could be a blessing in disguise. And that could be a pleasant way to look at it. If you have been thinking about that business idea, I know of an 8-hour section of the day that have free to work on things like that, right? That's not fair. That's not exactly true, but you know what I mean? This could be that opportunity to pull that rusty business plan out of your desk drawer and reevaluate it. And I did look into that and start playing around with those ideas. Just be aware, it's never 0 to 100 instantly, right? You're not going to start making those paychecks the next day, the next week, the next month, even. Building business is difficult. If you're listening to this and you're an entrepreneur, But what did I do? And this is another piece of advice for people who get laid off. LinkedIn. I'm sorry, I'll say it again, LinkedIn. And then more importantly, LinkedIn Premium. Now you're like, Wyatt, why would I pay for a premium service? I no longer have income coming in. Everyone has the opportunity, if you Google it online, to get 30 days of LinkedIn Premium free. Sometimes they give you 90 days. They have like random events. LinkedIn Premium was probably my saving grace in the end. Took a while again, but what happens is with LinkedIn Premium, what it does is it opens up your LinkedIn network. And I was fortunate. I didn't have a lot of work to do on LinkedIn because I've always been very active in LinkedIn. If you're listening to this podcast, follow me on LinkedIn. I love it. I have an all-star profile, as they call, and I'm very proud of that little star I have in my profile because I'm active. Everything's filled out. You can get all the information you want about me. But LinkedIn Premium, you get to see special insights about jobs. You get to see where you might stand in a group of applicants. You can see how many people applied to this job. You can send network messages to people that you previously couldn't with normal LinkedIn. LinkedIn Premium for job searchers is probably one of the best tools in existence, in my opinion. If you get laid off, get LinkedIn Premium and make your profile sparkle. Because, Tanner, there are recruiters out there who look at the thing all day, every day. And if your name pops up on a list and your profile rocks, you might get a call, and you never know where that can lead. And it's way better to have someone reach out to you than to write your 400th, cover letter. Good God, I hate cover letters. And resume tweaks. I tried to do the math once about how many cover letters and resumes I made during my layoff. It was close to 200. Resumes, fine, whatever. You can just tweak those and change some wording maybe. But good God, I wish American culture would finally bury the cover letter. It's a stupid piece that no one actually looks at. I digress. LinkedIn, get your resume fixed. Make it look good. Start wrapping up those references. Those people who said they wanted to provide you references, get their contact info. Just start preparing kind of your weaponry of finding a job.
You mentioned like staffing services and things like that. So much of it is also enlisting people to help you. So you have the references like you talk about, but there is community. There's people, peer groups who will give you recommendations, referrals, all sorts of stuff there. But then there's also this whole industry of third-party search and staffing. And I was completely ignorant to this before I started at the company. And it's kind of, I don't know, I didn't realize the value because a huge part of what they do is they will give you that reality check and they will tell you what you're worth on the market because their whole point is they are there to get you hired because that's how they get paid. And if you think you are Mr. Big Stuff, they're going to tell you very quickly that you're not. But also vice versa. If you are somebody who's been in a job for a long time, experienced this, and you were underpaid, you will now see what the market can really do for you. So thankfully, we're far different than the COVID times where everyone was experiencing these forced lockdowns and layoffs and all this uncertainty. We are now hitting a market with record low unemployment and people are really needing workers. And so it's crazy to find where you may have been in a job that they decided we don't need you at this and we're going to lay you off. And then you can find another opportunity and make way more money doing it, doing something where you're actually valued. And so partnering up with a recruiter or a staffing firm or those things to really help you craft your resume, put you in front of people, put you in front of opportunities is so valuable. And so you can realize like, okay, I don't have to do this alone, which is also just so comforting because it can feel really lonely. I've had a period in my life where I too couldn't find a job. I got an interview and they would give me the most BS reasons why they wouldn't want to hire me. And I was like, I'll take anything. I just don't want to go work at McDonald's again. I think I was 18 or 19 at the time. And I was like, come on, someone just give me a chance. So just going out and working with people that's their incentive is to get you that job is going to help you significantly.
And network in general doesn't just mean people on LinkedIn. Let people know your situation. Hitting that humility button again. One of the best things I did was make a giant post on my LinkedIn. I don't know how long after I got laid off, announcing it, not celebrating it, just saying, hey, this is the situation.
The open for work tag,
open for work,
image.
baby. But friends and family, they also have jobs, which means they're part of your network. And you would be amazed at the generosity of people when you are in trouble. I had some really beautiful interactions with friends, ex-coworkers, family members who bent over backwards to recommend me, to find jobs for me, to help me in any way possible to get that next gig, that next whatever. And it was really, truly inspiring. And you really get to see the people you can depend on, but you have to ask. We talked about this in the podcast, off screen or whatever, off mic. We talk about it. This has probably been in 30 episodes, one of my biggest eye openers of this, my learning experience of this podcast. It never hurts to ask. The worst someone could ever do is say no and move on. I've been terrified of asking for things for a long time. And, now that we're, it's a regular job to find interviewees and new subjects and things like that. And man, the power of asking, it's opened a whole new world for me. But during unemployment, talk to that network, get that, former colleagues, contacts that you have. They may provide leads and job opportunities that you wouldn't have asked. You wouldn't have known of if you didn't ask. Yeah.
The other thing is look to see where you can provide value to others. So a huge part of doing your job is, of course, doing things and finding success and providing value. And if you can go out and find things within your community, you can help people, you can mentor people, you can volunteer, you can do all these other things. One, you're going to get that personal validation and feel good because you're actually contributing. You're not just sitting on your couch playing Xbox, doing nothing, feeling bad about yourself. But also those collisions that you get with others, that breeds so much opportunity. And that kind of even goes in what we're talking about these podcasts, just because we're going out and reaching out and wanting to promote people's businesses and hear their stories and just wanting to genuinely help people and provide legitimate value to them. So many doors open up and so many things swing that you never would have even thought of when you're just closed off. And again, it's so easy just to fall into this bad circle where you just feel miserable about yourself and the world's out to hate you. And why can't we have universal basic income? Since the robots are going to take over anyway, why can't I just be paid to stay at home in my underwear? No, go out and do things, and you'd be unbelievably amazed how quickly things can spawn from that.
But that brings me to a really good next point. That's sitting on the couch. Self-care is of paramount importance during a layoff situation. It is very easy to fall into depression, to hopelessness, to anger. And with that comes health issues and exercise and diet issues and God forbid something worse, drinking problems. A layoff is one of the most stressful things that can happen to a person. It has to be in that top 5 list of stressful events in human life. Death of a loved one, so on and so forth. Buying a new house, major purchases, layoffs. It sucks, and it sucks bad. And it's very easy to fall into a pit of despair. I found myself there a couple of times, just I didn't want to do anything. Just depressed. But self-care, finding something that's of value, getting outside, going for a walk, exercise, finding a hobby. Don't, obsessively do it so much that you're no longer looking for a new job. But take time for yourself. You're still a human being. You still have feelings and emotions and health you need to consider. And your finances are already taking a hit. Your ego's already taken a hit. Don't let your health, mental or physical, take a hit as well.
Well, we're creatures of habits, right? Mm-hmm. So you're used to waking up Monday morning at a certain time, going to work, getting it home, doing all these things. And then when you're given the entire day and you don't know what to do with yourself, again, that's when you spiral. Yep. So I love what you're saying. If every day start building a new routine, maybe some of that can be you have certain time blocks where you're going to go look for certain opportunities. You're going to customize your resume to those opportunities and go apply to those jobs. You're going to meet with certain people. You're going to volunteer your time. You're going to go for walks. You're going to build, cook your meals. You're going to do all these things, but you build that structure around you, just like we talked about your foundation with your finances. Then you need to build that structure around your mental health, your physical health, your world. Because again, if you're out interviewing and you're just a mess in your life, that is going to
Yep.
translate. The So much of our communication is nonverbal, and you can just, as someone who's interviewed probably over 1,000 people now,
Yeah.
just through just a crazy amount, even just from a phone, you can tell confidence, you can tell
Mm-hmm.
sincerity, honesty, all these different things. And you can just feel when someone's desperate, or they're a little out of their league, or maybe they're too good for this but they just need something. That is by far one of the most frustrating things, and this is something that when I was 18 I dealt with, where you are so qualified for the job that they don't want to hire you because they know you're not going to stay with it. It is they don't need somebody who can do that plus 10 things because they know that when the right opportunity comes you're going to be gone. They want the right person for the right role in that seat, and you need to be figure out exactly what that seat is for you, because again, if you get a job, you want it to be the right job, because you don't want to be there in a couple months miserable and look continuously to look, and then your resume is going to look bad because then you're a quote job hopper who just is taking whatever. You want to make that right career step, so structure your life around that.
You mentioned job hopper, and I've become kind of an open book about myself because, fortunately, I learned that I had a huge ego back then, and I've worked hard on it. And why not tell people? So job hopping is a frustrating thing, especially during a layoff, but it's important for people to hear. Um, when you're in it, you're not job hopping; you are surviving. If you do not have extensive savings, if your severance runs out, or you didn't get one at all, you need a job. Whether you went from being a director at a tech company and now you are working at a fast food restaurant or something, um, sometimes situations dictate where you just need a job. And every job that you think you are qualified for, not hiring, maybe COVID hit, something like that. Um, After a while, I had to get a job. It's just a plain fact. I was unemployed for a long time, and sooner or later I had to get a job. And I worked a couple jobs, and I hated them all. And they bruised my ego even more than getting laid off, because I was working jobs that I probably would have got the summer after high school sometimes. Uh, and I've been working. I went to college, and I got these certifications, and I've been climbing this corporate ladder, and I had my own business card, and now I'm working a job that, like, 17, 18-year-old Wyatt would have been like, it's fine, I don't really have to do much, but it's a job. Talk about another ego hit. But I want to be the first person to say this. I want this to get out there, that it's okay. And if you have to get a job temporarily, remind yourself that it's just temporary, man. You're doing what's right for you, what's right for your family, what's best for them. And you're going to get back on your feet. You're going to get back in your career if that's where you want to go, or your side gig's going to pop off someday, or whatever the situation is. Really reminding yourself that you're doing the right thing for the right reason, and it's temporary. Um, Gosh, that, like I said, some of the jobs I had during my unemployment jobs uh, hurt my ego much more than the actual firing or the layoff. But in retrospect, I don't regret any of them, because I made a paycheck for my family, and I think that's important for a lot of people.
Well, there's a lot of value to temp work or contract work in that regards, right? So there's a difference between just going and picking up whatever job, just hoping to skip it later, to, hey, I need this opportunity is 4 weeks, or this opportunity is 6 months, this thing, and I'm going to do it while I'm building up whatever skills I need to shop whatever I have. Employers don't view contract work as a negative, because it's you fulfilled your need. So that is a great point, Wyatt, and that's a great opportunity to look into, because there's so many companies and things that can provide those for you. And again, depending on the market, I get COVID was this weird one where it was very humbling, where there were all the white collar, all the offices closed, but they still needed to be a lot of blue collar work and manual labor and things done. And you just, yeah, that's the opportunity to afford you. But what you don't want to do too is, let's say that you had your continuous improvement manager, and then all of a sudden you became a call center manager, and you knew that it's like, hey, it's a job, it's a paycheck, and they start relying on you, and they're planning on investing on you, and in your back of your head, you're just like, oh, I'm just going to wait until I can get that next, that next opening finally hits, so I'm going to leave them. That's kind of the distinction I want to make sure I communicate to the audience here. There is a expectation with hiring managers on different types of roles. And some are long-term opportunities where you're going to potentially be in that role for a long time with the potential for upward mobility. Again, in this world, we're talking about layoffs. That's not always super secure, but that you're going into that agreement. And then there's ones that are just like, hey, we need this gig done. And those are amazing opportunities. So don't be too proud. Don't be too think that those are a bad thing just to go do a 6-month contract gig. If you're in IT, tons of project based work there. If it happens to be manual labor and you need to go be a day laborer somewhere to get a paycheck, that's a great opportunity to get start networking, start getting things, and get out of the house.
And, it's unfortunate that that's still the state of affairs in the hiring world, that job hopping. And I understand why from a business perspective. I totally understand why that's a big red flag. I think the stigma behind that is lessening in the hiring world, but it still exists. And it's unfortunate, but it's a fact that it's easier to explain away a layoff gap in employment than I was a VP and then I worked at McDonald's for 6 months and then I got another VP job. It's easier to explain the fact you were just unemployed than the fact that you got another short-term, high school job, as some would call it, or a job that is not to your skill level anymore. It's unfortunate that that's the case, but it is the case. And you need to be sensitive around that fact when you find your next role back in your career path, or a new one or whatever. You need to be sensitive that you were doing what was right and what was needed to your family at the moment, but a hiring company will look at that as a red flag, and that sucks, but it's just reality. And you need to be sensitive when you're filling out your resume about how you explain that gap in your employment. Being honest, no one was surprised at the COVID layoffs because everyone experienced it. No one was surprised at the tech layoffs because everyone experienced it. But those cases are kind of unique, unfortunately. So I think there's a good balance. Do what you have to do for your family. Don't worry about what a future employer is going to say about your resume. Worry about that later. But when you get to the point where you're back there, you're applying, you're interviewing, you need to think through how you explain this gap. And there's no shame in saying, hey, I was laid off. Yeah, so was 25% of the population. So we get it, just consider that when you get back into the interviewing stage of careers. And 1099 work or contract work not only is super fun, it can be very lucrative. You can make a lot of money in contract work. My first gig back in my relative career path was contract. It was a 6-month contract, and I got renewed on that contract, and I made good money. Ultimately ended, but absolutely look at contract work. Companies love contractors. They're relatively cheap. They don't have to pay benefits. Rule of thumb in business is kind of take your annual salary and add 30%. That's what the company pays in your benefits. If you make $100,000, the company's paying $30,000 extra to have you as a W-2 employee. As a 1099 contract, they don't have to pay that 30%. It's a good deal. Look into contract work. Absolutely.
Just to keep on the subject a little bit more, because I think I can add some neat perspective to this too. I mean, the overall perspective is you need to be purposeful and not desperate. So if you're just going and snatching up whatever opportunity and thinking, okay, I'll just wait until the next opportunity, that's a really selfish move, because again, you're not thinking about the type of role that is, the investment that company is potentially making on you, especially if you're going to a small business. As someone who's owned a small business and had employees just bounce, there's a lot of cost, and there's a cost of the unfulfilled job. There's an actual monetary tick of based off how much revenue you do, what your total overhead is, your total employee size. It costs them money to have an unfilled position, and it costs a lot of money to fill a position. So if you're going to take that job and then 6 months down the road go to leave for another one, that's what business is thinking about. All those costs and all those expenditures and all that headache and time loss. The contract, you don't have that. And so it is really nice to where they can just bring you in, pay the quote premium, even though it really is the same cost, if not cheaper and less issues, and then have that while you are getting things together. Because you really need to figure out what you want to do with your career in this time. Because we talked about it can be a blessing in disguise, or it could be the biggest headache you've ever had, but it is an opportunity of forced change. And that is your time to evaluate what you want. So if it is that business you've always had on the side, well, maybe you can do contract work while you build up your business plan and your side hustle, and you can get things going there. If it is you really are passionate about this certain type of career, but you need certain certifications, go do that, build yourself up to get there. If it is you were in your dream job and it's just finding the right company to hit that job again, be smart and try to do those things. But the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, and this is what I see from feedback from hiring managers, is just snatching up whatever you can get, not thinking about the overall consequences of the people that are around in that company, because it is a big deal to hire somebody. I mean, it doesn't feel like that to a big thing, and it might feel even worse when you got laid off from a big company because you don't feel valued. But again, there's people on the other side, and their job is to hire and find teams and build teams and do those things. So that's still why that stigma hit.
I just want to temper the message we're sending out. At the end of the day, who cares? You have a family to support, and you need to support that family any way you can. Yes, you should do it intelligently with thought, but if you just got laid off, you're not considering HR departments or companies' hiring budgets, and that shouldn't be in your consideration. When you are in a layoff scenario, do things strategically, but you have to do things. And sometimes that means taking that job for a couple months and then getting the heck out. And I understand the stigma and I understand the repercussions, but I just want to be really careful the message we're putting out, because so many people, once again, are not in the position where they can lean back and really just evaluate and story map their future career prospects during the layoff. It's action time for a lot of people. And sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, because I think a lot of people will share the sentiment. My family's financial future is much more important to me than a company's, hiring budget. So I just want to temper that.
And I'll clarify too, I have no problem with, and what I don't want it to sound like, don't take a job. I want it to be like, to say is, you take the job on the right pretense, right? Find the job. You're going to be interviewing at a job. If they're saying we're looking for a long-term hire, make sure it's the right opportunity
That's
for
fair.
you. Come into it with honesty. If you go work a blue collar job that they know that's very transactional and they have high turnover, of course you can take that job. That's a different conversation than, hey, I'm looking to build my team and I'm looking for someone to help do this in the long term. And that's the context I wanted to say, because I see that a lot. And it is really unfortunate. It really turns off people, because I have conversations with companies who are trying to grow and build their teams, and they come in and they see a person who's been in a company every single year, and they're all direct hire jobs, and they've had these 6 things, and those people they don't want to touch, period, because there's so much risk with that. And if they would have just done it via contract, there would be no risk. They're like, yeah, they've been doing the contract game for a long time. And then they're looking for the right long-term opportunity, and we're there to help find it or whatever. But you get people who just pick up anything on the pretense that they're going to be there a long time. And that goes just to honesty. But again, just figuring out, but I agree. Like, if you need to get a job, get a job. Like, and there's people that will help you get a job. And especially if you don't have an ego in like, this is beneath me, but I'm going to do it and I'm going to learn from it. And then I'm going to build up those finances until I can get my next one or those opportunities. I think that's perfect. but just make sure you're doing it on the right terms.
It's situationally dependent. For the example you gave, of course, absolutely, taking a full-time job where they want someone to build a department over time and then ditching 3 months later when a better job should. Absolutely, I understand. But Tanner, you're a recruiter, dude. So once again, situations are dependent. Back when I was unemployed for 12 months or so, if I would have found a job that they wanted me to build their team, and 3 months into that job, I had an opportunity to get back in my career, I 100% would do it. And I'm sorry, it's when you're laid off, you're not considering company's bottom line, and you shouldn't. So it just, once again, this goes back to kind of the first things on the list we talked about, is understand what your situation is. If you are to that desperate point, you got to make moves. And if you're not, and you have a bit of time to do a strategic move, awesome. And you should always enter contracts of employment with honesty. I would never encourage someone to go in maliciously with the intent of ditching in a couple weeks, even though they plan to have them for the next 5 years. Never would encourage that. But it all boils down to, I felt that panic. I felt that fear. I don't care what company hired me, and I immediately quit if my family got what they needed. So it's situation dependent.
I don't think a lot of people understand that there is a lot of options for contract or 1099 work or all these things. And I would look to more contract work than 1099, because when you're 1099, you're in charge of your own taxes and your own healthcare and all this other stuff. It's a lot of overhead. It's a lot of risk for insurance, especially if you do different things. So really what we're talking about is you become a W-2 employee for a contract company on a temp terms. It can be weekly, it could be monthly, it could be 6 months, it could be a year or longer. And those have different expectations than what we refer to as a direct hire placement, a permanent placement. And so the things you want to look at are, again, I understand wholeheartedly that things are desperate. But look at what options are out there and think longer term too, because again, it's so easy to think short term when you are desperate. It's so easy to feel like you're starving when you're hungry, because in many ways you are. But if you can be purposeful, lay out, and have smart planning, you can make the right steps and not have those long term repercussions bite you in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we took your example, and again, just a hypothetical, and you had a couple opportunities where you took a direct hire placement, you started there 3 months, you quit, you had this next opportunity, and something happened where you got laid off on that one, and then when you're going and applying again, that person's not going to look at your last layoff, they're going to look at the one you quit. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you went from a very reliable person who was just unfortunately affected by a layoff to an unreliable person with a lot more risk. Totally. And that's going to hurt your job prospects way more in the future. So instead, again, be smart about it. Think of what type of opportunities or what's going to fit for what your long-term objectives are too. Because again, I think the value we can kind of get from people in this video is, you shouldn't let this disruption impact the long term of your life. You should if your plan is, hey, I've always dreamed about opening a bakery, or I've always dreamed about opening a game store, doing these things, and I'm just saving up to do that. And then you hit this disruption, you should still have those same long-term goals. If your long-term goal is, I want to be a systems administrator, I want to be a certain type of manager, those goals should still be there and not completely thrown off because you were affected by this layoff.
I agree. Absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah.
So I think we got there.
Yeah. So, and speaking of which, I want to shout out to the audience. Like, if you feel comfortable and you have a story about a layoff and actions that were taken and how it worked for you, let us know. I've become an open book the older I get. I just don't care anymore. But if you feel comfortable sharing that, please let us know. I would love to talk to you and get other perspectives, because everyone's experience in a layoff is different, and the only thing they have in common is it sucks.
So now that we're at the end there, I'd like you to share your second layoff.
So I mentioned that I took a contract job. I took 1099, which means I paid my own taxes, blah, 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 blah. And God, I really I didn't make as much as I did before, but it was enough, and I could have survived off this job if it became my permanent job, essentially. And it was really enjoyable work. It wasn't exactly my career path, but it was close, and I learned some new skill sets, and I really enjoyed it. It was a fun job, and the um, what happened was I don't remember the exact cause of it. I think the company ended up selling, and the company didn't dissolve; it got absorbed, I think. Um, and the first thing that happens in a company absorption or procurement is third contract stuff goes out the window. Uh, they're not going to lay off their full-time employees. Janet in finance has been there for 35 years. They're not going to lay her off before they lay off the consultants or the contractors. So I had gotten to have some new coworkers. I went to functions, like it was when COVID was lifting, and I went had beers with some of these people, and and I'm still in contact with several of these people in this random contract job I got. I just really had fun in it, and it fit me. And yep, the day came and they're like, hey, we got bought, and guess what? Step number one of this procurement is all 1099s are gone. And I was like, oh crap. I had just got comfortable again after a very prolonged period of time of being laid off and temp work and all these things. And I had just kind of settled in to a new company and a new role and maybe even a new career path. It got that comfortable for me, and it was instantly taken away. And for about an hour, I spiraled. And I was like, oh God, here we go again. Oh, my life's crumbling again. It didn't turn out that way. And in fact, the individuals I met and befriended became the recommendations and the referrals that got me my career and my job today that I'm very passionate about and love. So it wasn't as dramatic, but like I said, for about an hour, I probably was the biggest mess of my life because I was laid off twice in 6, 7, 8 months, whatever the time frame was. Fortunately, I've blocked most of that trauma from my brain. No, I'm just kidding. About an hour, I spiraled, but then I sat back up and I realized I had experience in it now, and I knew what it was like, and I knew the steps I had to take. And fortunately, things fell into place for me a bit easier there. And contract work actually was a big boon to my resume, to be honest. So contract work led me to being a consultant, and holy cow, do I love consulting. But yeah, that's it. It's not as dramatic, but man, if there was a camera on me for that first hour, it was weird, man. Talk about a quick spiral. But I picked myself up really quickly because I had that experience and I had developed the network and the support. So that's the second layoff story. I hope to never experience again. Unfortunately, times are weird, man. No one can depend on that 40, 50 year, 30 to 40 year career anymore. So I think if I had one piece of advice, one single piece of advice to give people from my 2 layoffs, my year of unemployment, which no way, shape, or form makes me an expert, but I have experience in it. One piece of advice is check your ego. Good God, I didn't think I was an egotistical person, but man, I was so full of it. I was so full of myself. You got to let that shit go. Pardon the curse word. I try really hard on this podcast to be good. Ego is probably the biggest killer, in my opinion. If you're not a huge egotistical person, you're leaps and bounds ahead of where I was. But if you feel like the universe just did you dirty and you don't deserve this, you need to look at all of the layoffs that happened over the last several years, whether it was COVID, whether it was tech, and realize that thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are dealing with it. And chances are good, a good portion of those people have it worse than you. And keep that in mind. Humility will get you much further in life than thinking you are God's gift to business. So thank you, Tanner, this. I don't know if this is how you planned the podcast to go, because it kind of felt like you interviewed me about being unemployed. But thanks for giving me the opportunity to share this story, because I think a big piece of wanting to share it is so many people are experiencing it, and people may experience it again in the future. I hope not. I hope everyone's safe and secure, but if not, stay humble and reach out to your network.
Yeah, I have no plans actually with these podcasts because
I
every
know.
time I try to put together a script, we deviate so
We
much.
texted
So
like 3 hours before this, be
yeah,
like, hey, how about we talk about
yeah,
layoffs? It's like, oh crap, let's do it.
yeah. No, I love your piece of advice, and the only thing I would add to it, and you kind of touched on the end, is look outside of yourself to realize that there's more, there's community, there's people to actually help you, and don't be too proud to ask for help. And whether that be friends, family, a company like a
Hmm.
recruiter, different sorts of professionals, your network, and don't just make it about yourself, make it about them too, because again, the more you're actually doing for the world, it's just how the world seems to align
Yeah.
better for you. So you'll feel better just doing more for others too. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Again, thank you so much for sharing your story, Wyatt. It's fantastic. And I'd like to thank everybody who has listened to it. Please make sure to like and share it. Subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Our subscriber counts are growing, which is
Yes. Thank you
fantastic. But
guys.
it's all from the interactions and the shares and people actually finding some value from it and kind of giving that to others too. So we really appreciate that. So once again, thanks again. You all have a great week. We will see you next time.